Welcome to Amidon Planet. I'm your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to learn how to teach better. Today on episode 83 of the podcast is my best friend and assistant principal at Sauk Prairie High School, Shane Bean. Shane is a return guest to Amidon Planet because he was around he came on during the pandemic. We had a chance to reflect on our years in teaching together because we both accepted positions at Sauk Prairie High School the same year. We started in the fall of 2002, so 20 years ago. And so we did a reflection episode during the pandemic, but now he's coming back, and we're going to talk about John Wooden's Pyramid of Success, which is a book that can be found on many coaches' bookshelves, and the pyramid specifically is a poster which can be found on many coaches' walls, specifically the coach Ted Lasso. That's right. In episode 1 of Ted Lasso, about 10 minutes in maybe, when they're setting up their office, you see him put up the John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. So what is the Pyramid of Success? And we're going to talk about it in the episode, so you're going to hear a lot about it. But really, what I see it as is John Wooden was a very successful basketball coach at UCLA, and he was also an educator. So that's also good in thinking about how to teach better. He identified himself as an educator. He was a trained educator, became a coach, and was, again, one of the most successful coaches. And so when you think about the words that coaches throw around, like success or poise or skill or integrity, alertness, self-control, industriousness, all those sorts of things, in this book is basically almost like a dictionary where Wooden has refined and honed these words and definitions that put them all together, and you can create the pyramid of success. And even define success, where success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. And so him as a a legendary championship coach to say like, hey, here's my definition of success. And really, that definition it depends. It depends on who the person is, right? Which is important because sometimes we put definitions of success onto our students, our kids, others, right? Hey, this is what success is, when that might not be what that person's definition of success. Again, success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction, knowing you did your best to become the best that you're capable of becoming. Now, that doesn't mean that a coach or someone is like saying, hey, we're capable of this. And now let's go back to John Wooden. Did he communicate to his players like, hey, you're going to actually win a championship every single year that you're here? Was that, if they didn't do it, was that like we fell short of success? Like, I don't know. But I'm guessing that he was able to put into their minds like, hey, if we do the best that we are capable of doing, we can be champions all the time. So it's kind of amazing when you think about that. And so what I like about this pyramid is that it communicates these definitions and it then gives you like handles for what they actually mean. And so like, for example, we talk about in my program these ideas of like these pocket-sized philosophy statements. And so having these pocket-sized philosophy statements that you carry with you and thinking about, well, what does each word mean? So like one of my first pocket-sized philosophy statements was I wanted my students to be successful in math and in life, right? So basically saying I want to do a good job of teaching the math, but knowing that my job extends beyond that. But success, right? That definition, that's the word success in there, successful in math and in life. And when I think about that word success, I'm looking at this definition. Peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction, knowing you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming, right? And so helping my students see that in both math and in life. And that's what I like about the pyramid of success, is taking those definitions and being able to apply them and say, when I say success, here's what I mean. When I say the word integrity, I'm talking about purity of intention. When I talk about poise, I'm talking about just being yourself, being at ease in any situation, never fighting yourself, right? So having these sort of handles on these words instead of just throwing them around and make where they're, kind of buzzy, that you don't really have the definitions behind them, but they sound good in a statement. But really like, no, when I say that word, this is what I mean. And I really like that. And so I've been wanting to do this for a long time. It's just been trying to get Shane to get on the podcast to talk about it because he's a busy guy again. And we'll talk about how busy he is and about why he hasn't watched Ted Lasso. So we're going to get into it in just a second again, but I want to make sure that we kind of honor the book, making sure if people want the book, they get access to it. So Coach Wooden's Pyramid of Success, Building Blocks to a Better Life. That's the version that we're talking about. There's another version of a Pyramid of Success, but this is the one that I have access to. So Coach Wooden's Pyramid of Success, Building Blocks to a Better Life by John Wooden and Jay Carty. It was published in 2004 by Regal Books. I think it was revised after that. And in 2006, he won the Evangelical Christian Publishers Association Award for Inspiration and Gift. And as of the recording of this episode, it has a 4.15 out of 5 rating on Goodreads, with 76% of the ratings being either a 4 or a 5. Now, as always, you know that Shane and I will not be able to communicate the whole value of the book. And even if we did, it would just be from our perspective. In other words, if you like what you hear, get the book for yourself. Right now, the book can be purchased for around $15 on bookshop.org, which is a website committed to helping local independent bookstores thrive in the age of e-commerce. A link to bookshop.org can be found in the show notes of this episode at amazonplanet.com/episode 83, where your purchase will not only support local booksellers, but also the production costs of the Amazon Planet podcast. Or, better yet, wander down to your local bookseller like Square Books here in Oxford, Mississippi, and pick up a copy. You even might be able to find it at a good used bookstore, actually, because it's been out for a while. But anyway, I would. It's a great book. It's a great book, and we'll talk about it now. So, without further delay, here is my conversation with Shane Bean on Coach Wooden's Pyramid of Success.
All right. Well, now we're messing with the podcast. That's here we go. Well, Shane, welcome to Amazon Planet. How are you doing?
I'm doing good today, Joel. How are you?
It's nice to start a podcast in the midst of an argument. So, hey, that's how we roll. That's how we're going to do it.
Well said. Well said.
Should we start with some abusive questions?
Yes, let's go.
Hey, Shane, why haven't you watched Ted Lasso? What's wrong with you? Why aren't you an American? Here we go. Go for it.
Well, because
as we're in the World Cup right now, Shane, we just had a miracle game win last night as of this podcast recording, and you're not a part of it. So why? Why not? Go ahead, Shane.
I'm not a college professor who has all sorts of time on my hands and can watch a World Cup game, which wasn't at night, which was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's true.
Thank you very much.
We got called out of school early because of some severe weather down here, just to be honest. So it was kind of a nice, I don't know, maybe the superintendent down here is a real big soccer fan, but I don't think that's true. Or he could be, but I don't think that was why we got our schools let out early yesterday, but we got to watch the World Cup game. Anyway, back to you. No, no divergence.
Well, to be fair, right, is that, I work as an assistant principal. I work on a farm as well that my family owns. I have 4 kids that I'm still chasing around, even though one's in college. And then I do roughing and those kind of things. I don't have a lot of time to watch TV. Plus, I refuse, as a child of the 80s and 90s, I am not a binger, right? I believe, going to these blocks, right? I believe that you should have discipline even in your recreation, right? So 2 things to that. I eat my dessert slow, right? When I'm at somewhere,
savor.
I'm gonna have
you savor.
Savor. And in fact, if it's one of my favorites, I might only have half tonight and discipline myself to have the next half the other night.
Oh, well, that's
but
just
secondly, right?
Okay.
In college, you got to watch a show 1 week at a time, and there was that anticipation and build up. So I don't let myself binge and watch shows over and over again, or back to back to back to back, and watch them all in one day, and then I'm done. Right? 90210 every Thursday night, we would gather in the dorm across from mine, and we would watch that as a bunch of guys. So right now, to tell you where I'm at in my television viewing, I'm going through Breaking Bad right now.
And so, what season are you on of Breaking Bad?
Season 2.
Season 2.
I'm hoping to get done with this series by the end of next year, and then I'm going to move on to 24.
Yeah. So Shane, as my best friend and as someone that I love and care about, you are old, and so sometimes we need to break out of that for your kids' sake and for the sake of everyone here. But Ted Lasso is a treasure. An absolute treasure. And I've tried to convince you of that. And I also know, knowing you, that sometimes the purse strings might be a little tight as well. And yes, it is a subscription service. But again, if you do the binge thing, you could crack those out in, in a month. It's only one month. I think it's like $5. I'll send you the 5. I'll send it to you. Actually, I won't. I might have tighter purse strings than you. All right. So the reason why we're talking about Ted Lasso is because of the book that we want to talk about today. And that is John Wooden's, Coach Wooden's Pyramid of Success, Building Blocks for a Better Life by John Wooden, the great all-time coach of UCLA basketball, and Jay Carty. Don't want to forget Jay. So what does that have to do with Ted Lasso? Well, if you were a watcher of Ted Lasso, Shane, you would see when he and Coach Beard set up their office at the beginning of towards the middle of the first episode, they're setting up their office and they're hanging up some things. I think one of them is a couple pictures. I think one of them is Muhammad Ali when he punches out Sonny Liston. I think that was one. I believe the Miracle on Ice when they won the gold medal, the 1980 U.S. hockey team. Is it 1980 or 84? 1980. Miracle on Ice. And then great movie with Kurt Russell also. But one of the other things they hung up was John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. And I'm like, hey, that's John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. And actually, if you look close, it's actually signed by John Wooden. So that gets you as an introduction to Coach Lasso. And you see like, okay, like he looks at some pretty good sources for his motivation, which you then find out later that he is as both of us were coaches, some more successful than others. We're laughing because Shane knows in my 8th grade, I was a coach of the 8th grade football team at Sauk Prairie Middle School, and we did not win a game at all. I think we tied one, but no wins at all. So that was not good. Anyway.
But you had a much more successful high school.
But yeah, what was it? Varsity, JV? No, JV. Freshman. Was it JV or freshman?
Freshman girls.
Yeah. Freshman girls basketball. I wasn't put in charge. Oh yeah. Cause you got put up, you got called up to the big show.
Yep.
I was the freshman basketball coach. I was in charge of coaching. I was the assistant, but I was in charge of coaching that game. And we won that game. The only issue is I was very excited about the team and how they were playing. And after the first half was over, we went in, gave my talk, and like, let's get back out there. And there was still like 5 minutes left to go before the second half started. We had a lot of free throws and layups that we shot before the second half. But man, we were raring to go. Shane.
Now that you've watched Ted Lasso, do you feel like you'd be better prepared to have a better halftime speech?
Oh, absolutely. I would just put up, and you probably haven't seen this. He's got a little sign that says "Believe," and I just slap that. That's it. And just stare. Just stare each of them in the eyes.
Okay. That's effective with freshman girls.
Yeah. So the reason why I have this book, I have the actual physical copy of the book, and I'm sure you have it somewhere because you never get rid of anything, but it's somewhere. But we read this book together. Like we used to meet every Thursday morning. We still talk every Thursday morning, but we used to meet every Thursday morning at the Eagle Inn in Prairie to Sac. I almost made a mistake there. Prairie to Sac, Wisconsin. And I'd have the Eagle Inn breakfast, greatest breakfast sandwich ever created. And we would just basically go over one of these. Did we just do one a week?
1 a week. Yep.
1 a week. Yeah. So it took a decent amount of time. And we would talk about, in the book, there's these building blocks, and each of them is basically a word that you would associate with excellence, all building towards success. And so each of these building blocks, so we're talking about competitive greatness, poise, confidence, condition, skill, team spirit, self-control, alertness, initiative, intentness, industriousness, friendship, loyalty, cooperation, enthusiasm. And each of those is building up towards the ultimate, which again is this idea of putting all these things together is getting you towards the idea of success, which Wooden defines as peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. So we decided to take this on over basically over a semester, I would say, and to keep come back and keep reading each little section, kind of treated it kind of like a devotional, had that as our kind of conversation for the day as we had breakfast and before we went to teach at Sauk Prairie High School. So yeah, Shane and I have been on a previous podcast. We'll put a link to it in the show notes where we kind of talk about our relationship with teaching. We both started teaching at Sauk Prairie High School in 2002.
2002. Yep. 20 years ago.
20 years. And, yeah. And so, we became friends shortly after a brief start where we were both taught the same content. And so we had lots of meetings together and that ended up being a friendship. And then 20 years later, here we are talking over Zoom, which would be a weird thing to bring back 20 years ago and say, hey, we're going to be talking over Zoom. Yeah. So when do you think we read it? Like, I know we read a bunch of stuff. When do you think we got into this book?
Yeah, I think we read this 2006, 2007, somewhere in there.
Did we go to because I think I went to an FCA thing, Fellowship of Christian Athletes thing in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is right by where I'm from. And I think maybe that's when I got the book. I don't know. Does that sound familiar?
That sounds about right to me when I was trying to think about it. And, I appreciate you bringing it forward because I've used this book, in the format that we've used it. I've used this with several other coaches as we've gone through it in that same format and people that were just struggling. And so I think I do think my copy, I've given it away because it is a powerful book there. So,
wow. That makes me feel bad, Shane. Thank you.
Yeah, you were teasing me before. But I think, Joel, when you're talking about that meaty part of it, I think that fits right even in the pyramid of the condition. It's of how you condition yourself. And one of the things that was valuable, and John Wynn talks about being both mental, physical, we think of physical conditioning, but the mental, and in this case, the faith, the accountability portion of that, of conditioning ourselves and wanting to get better. And so you went to this event and heard about this book or saw this resource. We've both been fans of John Wooden and admire him for who he is. And this was something that we could use to help us as educators, as coaches, as people get better. But it's a deliberate process where you condition yourself and you put yourself in positions to get better. And
I guess to go along with that, and how does it do that? I think about, and unfortunately, this is about learning to teach better. I think about when I'm talking to my students about like lesson planning and teaching, I think about starting with the fundamentals, of what are the definitions. And when I think about definitions of these words that are kind of like, they kind of float a little bit, like when you talk about, we should have team spirit. And here's, John Wooden was a guy who thought about how to create it, how to put it, how to instill it, how to foster it, keep feeding it. And he then goes and defines it and here's what it is, because here's what it is. If you know what it is, then you also know what it isn't. And so thinking about team spirit, a genuine consideration for others, an eagerness to sacrifice personal interests of glory for the welfare of all. And so having these definitions is a gift that he's given. And again, that's why it's nice to have a book like this. They can point to these things and be like, hey, here's what I mean by some of these words. I find that as very helpful as well.
And that he was able, you described it well, that he was able to take these words that kind of float out there and really give meat to them. And you knew by his teams and by his life that he lived them out. And that they were meaningful. So the depth is great.
Well, you could also tell he is an educator, right? Mm-hmm. And so thinking if I'm going to aim for something, how do I build someone up toward that point? And so even thinking when we talk about, differentiation, right? And how to help people, I think about this idea of success, right? Going back to the idea of success, that direct result of self-satisfaction, knowing you did your best to become the best that you're capable of becoming. So not expecting every student to have the same exact outcomes or the same exact inputs going in, but thinking about how do you help maximize what a student is capable of doing? How do you create an environment? How do you create circumstances for them to do that? And it's hey, that's what we're trying to achieve with regards to differentiated instruction and or creating more equitable classrooms. So
while having high standards as we do that,
absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And any other background? So that's where I guess I found the book was at. Yeah, I guess I kind of heard of it before, but any other background that for you for this book? I know you had some pretty outstanding coaches, I'd guess, in the past that maybe have referenced this work before. I don't know. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah. The principal and superintendent and basketball coach that impacted me, Tom Andres and Cliff Thompson, both of them were longtime studiers of John Wooden and admirers of him. But, from numerous perspectives, and this book does add on that faith component of how do we look at a guy who's arguably the best ever at his space, his craft, and yet did it with integrity, did it in such a way that you never questioned what he was able to achieve and how he achieved it. And so I've got 2 or 3 other books, of his on my bookshelf. And when you think about the combination of the faith, of the basketball, and of the education and integrity portion of it, just was a natural fit for us to study.
Yeah, no, it was good. And with Tom Andrews, a former guest on the podcast as well, we talked about fish. Yeah, that was a good one as well.
Yeah.
I would try to describe Cliff Thompson to people, but I don't think I could do it justice.
He might be more Ted Lasso like than if I
yeah, that's actually true. that's really like Ted Lasso's dad, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, actually not in the. There was a little different. Ted Lasso's dad was a little different in the show, but yeah, just that kind of unshakable enthusiasm. Also a great storyteller as well. All right, so we're going to jump into the book and how we're going to do it. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I wanted to do a draft of blocks of the pyramid. So you're going to get three blocks. We're going to snake draft. We'll go back and forth. I've got my handy dandy coaster here that I'm going to flip. And so then we're going to go through and identify our favorite block within the pyramid and think about how do we apply it towards our teaching and see what we end up with at the end. All right?
All right.
Ready? Okay. Thought this a little bit.
Do we have
I'm tilting my camera down so you can see it.
Do we have established which one's heads and which one's tails?
The heads would be, so it's a Nashville, Music City coaster. So this is heads. The back would be tails. Okay. And you get to pick.
Okay. Heads.
This is a bad flip. Went on the ground. All right. There you go. It is tails. Sorry, Shane.
For those of you listening to the podcast, that may have been the worst flip that I've ever seen.
It was a bad flip.
It literally flipped one time.
I've never flipped a coaster before for competition purposes. All right. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. I am going to start with industriousness. We actually kind of joked about this one beforehand, but it's one of the corners of the pyramid. And just to be honest, I did some reading and I know that Wooden never changed the corners of the pyramid, the 3 corners. Those have always stayed locked in. So I'm picking one of the corners. Industriousness, which is there is no substitute for work. Worthwhile results come from hard work and careful planning. I'm just seeing that now. Like I've got my planner here. I'm feeling a little bit out of sorts. So, knowing where to put my work. So that's kind of the back part, like the careful planning part. But then just thinking like, no matter what, sometime, no matter what the system is, no matter what you try to do, whatever tool you're using, if you're using technology, whatever, eventually it comes to a point where you need to work. Right. And so, if it is at basketball, if it is at teaching, whatever, you need to put in the work to do that. There's, like you said, no substitute for work. And I guess, one of the things that I want to instill with my, students I'm a teacher of teachers. And so, think like you do have to put in the work. You do have to think about how best you're going to, meet the needs of your students. I remember when we were teaching with a curriculum where we were facilitating the classroom. We never sat down. Like think about a time when you sat down in our class. It never happened because you were constantly facilitating the kind of the mathematical discussions that were happening and trying to, get it all to come to a nice, neat end and to facilitate a summarizing of the mathematics. And like, you couldn't exchange that for like, there was no substitution. So I like the idea of industriousness is what I'm going to take in round one, the number one draft pick of the Pyramid of Success draft.
Yeah. You did steal my number two. That was my number two. I just at the end of the day, hard work just trumps, right? I mean, you can control that. You can control what you do and what you work, and you can encourage others to do the same. So good choice.
Well, and seeing that too, coming from Sauk Prairie, there's a lot of farming community where there's kids that they were not scared of work. They definitely were not like to put that in, and so just making sure that kids or my own kids, and also thinking about teachers like do they have that? Do they see like, hey, hard work does pay off? And that's what I think Wooden would say too.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So for me, you took one of the triangle or the edges of the triangle, and I'm going to go to one of them as well for my first competitive greatness. I know it seems too easy to pick it. It's at the top of the pyramid. It's what everything builds up to. And so I appreciate you picked one of those that are at that bottom, just the core foundation of it. And for me, I had competitive greatness. Perform at your best when your best is required, and your best is required each day. And I just think about that. One of the challenges, I do refereeing and I've moved into varsity and getting some bigger games. But one of the challenges from another referee has been, no matter what game you're doing, you may be doing the worst game of the year. You might be doing a freshman game, whatever that is that for those kids at that night, that is the biggest game that they have. And that is the biggest game that you have. And so you should be bringing, like you bring to a state championship game, the level of preparation and work you should be bringing to that 8th grade B game in that same way of bringing your best. And so I think about how that compares to the classroom, right? There's days when we're tempted to mail it in as teachers. There's days, well, I'm going to have them another day. I'm going to do this. That bell is going to ring. Those kids are going to file into our classroom, whether we like it or not, whether we're ready or not. And they deserve our best. This is our one shot at that day of the 180 days if you have them for a year or for a trimester or that we have for 60 days. That's one of the days that we get them. And we don't necessarily have to do something pushing an academic, but it is a valuable day. And what we do should be planned to be valuable. And at the end of it, no matter what we do, they deserve our best every day. Even if we don't feel the best, we might recognize that, but we need to bring it every day as an educator and in life to those situations.
Well, and I'm going to give you some kudos, Shane, because I remember, because I got a chance when I was doing my doctoral work to come in and hang out in your classroom a little bit, and which kind of was a nice, well, and also too, I saw you when I was still a teacher at Sauk Prairie High School, but seeing the way you would interact with students, and there'd be students who they're coming back next year to repeat a class, choices or circumstances or whatever, like they're coming back where, you might see some teachers that might give up on a kid, like, hey, they want to put their head down, whatever. And like, I would see you like, and interacting with that kid so that a way that you were building that relationship for the next year. So like, hey, we can have a better experience next year. We can still learn some math this year. We can still, build on, it's not a lost cause sort of situation. So like, and seeing that challenge of connecting with a kid and just kind of thrive, or just trying to figure them out and try to build that relationship. I appreciated that from you and took that from you as well too. And just because knowing that kid might have similar experiences in other classes where they're not being paid attention to, they're not being seen. And like you would see all these kids and also making sure to try to build those relationships with them. And I appreciated that. And it seemed like that was kind of indicative of this building block here.
Yeah. No, thank you. And that's one of the biggest things, right? As we continue to fight gaps, what you're describing is how do we include all and how do we bring our best to all every day, no matter their circumstances. So no, thank you for that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna round out the three corners of the pyramid here. And speaking of, I think the grand master of this descriptor, Cliff Thompson. I'm gonna go for enthusiasm. I've heard him say that word a few times, but so enthusiasm is brushes off upon those with whom you come in contact. You must truly enjoy what you are doing. And I mean, when I consider the first meeting Cliff Thompson and the enthusiasm that he had for life, for interacting with kids. I was the athletic director at that time, our activities director, and just, and also I think he did the announcements, and it was just a pleasure, and so he just got fired up for things. And also I think Tom Andrews also displayed that as well, and just enthusiasm for the job, and just made you want to like just run to your classroom and like, let's get ready for this, this year, or this day, or whatever. And so, and that is true. So that brushes off, and just seeing that effect on me and thinking like, okay, I want that effect on others. And also seeing that with students that I'm, trying to teach to be teachers, or trying to help them be the teachers that they're supposed to be. Like, you see how enthusiastic they are. And then when they go to be to take on the teacher role, sometimes they act like teachers rather than being the teacher that they are called to be. Right. And I think you and I had some very different styles with our approach to teaching, but both I think would be described as enthusiastic, just in different ways. Right. But having that sort of, that enjoyment of being in the classroom and thinking about how best to interact with kids, how to help them understand things, or getting excited for, their understandings. Like, oh my gosh, you came up with something, you did that problem really well, and whatever, the way they described it. And so I think enthusiasm is one, I can see why it's a cornerstone, and I can see also why it'd be important to have as a cornerstone of success, right? Because if you want them to be successful, you want them to achieve what they can, you need some enthusiasm. You need to have some enjoyment in that, in what you're engaging in.
And Joel, I can see this is highlights some of the differences between us. I didn't have enthusiasm on my list of drafts. And yet for you, this is your next choice. And I think you described it well in there. I think we're both enthusiastic, but when I read the description of the energy and those kind of things, you brought that every day. And I wish, I'm jealous of that, that I didn't. I was enthusiastic, and I appreciate how you said that even, that I was enthusiastic in different ways. And if you walked into both of our classrooms, you'd see a different energy level and a different part of that. And that's something that I've always been envious of you, that you can bring to projects and to presentations. And so for me, that enthusiasm leads into my next choice of poise, which is on the second to highest tier of the pyramid, one of the direct building blocks to competitive greatness. And in poise, Wooden talks about be yourself. Don't be thrown off by events, good or bad. And I think poise brings in some of the other lower ones of discipline and self-control, preparation, the confidence that comes with that. But I really appreciate that be yourself. And I think for educators in the classroom, that's really important. I could try to be you, but that would not go well for the students, because it's not who I am. As a coach, right, I'd watch these successful coaches and they yell and they get all fired up. And I try to copy that, and I could do it for 5 minutes maybe, because it's not my personality. And I'm not true to myself, then I'm not the teacher that I need to be, because it's not a natural outflow. Now I'm putting on a performance as opposed to leading and teaching in that way. And even as an educator, right, there are things that are going to happen in that period of time when we're in the class where a kid's going to get upset, or there's going to be a cheating episode, or another kid's going to do something to another kid. And how do we remain poised? How do we remain in control, caring for both sides of it, and being able to be steady and calm throughout the situation? So I just when you walk into a classroom, you can see, that the educator has poise. Or you can see that this is something that they need to work on. I'm sure as a leader of new teachers that you can sense that as well as you watch them grow over the course of the time in the program.
Yeah, we have a virtual simulation classroom that people can go in and they get a chance to like do a practice lesson. And And it's almost like a test in boys to see like how comfortable they are in their own skin. And like, you see how they're either, they're doing it, or they're like at the end it said, never fighting yourself. They're fighting themselves. They're like, like what
And
am I
sometimes we
doing?
don't always like who we are.
Yeah. But I mean, or just like, or even like, I think I know what I'm supposed to be, but I am trying, like you're saying, trying to be something different. And it's like, well, that's not who I am as a teacher, or like you're saying, as a coach, versus me. I don't know if you know this, Shane, I'm a very vocal basketball coach here for the, in the Oxford Parks to Commission team. We're trying to be the Bucks again this year. And you'll know where, if you go into the gym, you'll know where I am. Fairly quickly. So we kind of changed the rules a little bit. I was going for the greatest, like, a material from the pyramid of success. And the pyramid is made of blocks, but also has mortar qualities. And the one that I really like that stuck with me for a long time is integrity, which is the purity of intention. And so trying to be, and I see that as almost like being consistent with your interactions, everything, like who you are when nobody's looking is the same person as who you are when everyone's looking, that sort of thing. I really like that. But that's not on your pyramid. Mm-hmm. So I can't pick that one. I'm not picking it. No, I'm not picking it. I'm going elsewhere.
All right.
I'm going to go. So I'm having to do, I like the condition. We talked about condition, mental, moral, physical, but I'm actually going to go with skill. Okay. So I think these fit together. So, I'm going to round them out. Once we're done, we're going to kind of round them out and see how they fit together. So I'm going with skill, a knowledge of and the ability to properly and quickly execute the fundamentals, be prepared and cover every detail. So, there are certain things in order to make the whole thing work. So let's go back to basketball. Watching the Golden State Warriors, like when Kevin Durant was on the team, was a thing of beauty. I mean, it was a masterpiece in the way that they interacted and the way they passed into, like, even watching, some of the games where Klay Thompson would score like 40 and only take like 3 dribbles. And that was not just because of him, that because of a whole team that sees that he's hot and knows to get him the pass in the right spot. He doesn't even need to take a dribble because he can just shoot, pull up, and then he's scoring all sorts of points. But all the skills that go into that, like, those are all very skilled individuals. And so thinking about what are the skills you need to have? So, like, even thinking about it from a teaching perspective, do you have a master of the technology? If you're using your Promethean board, you know how to use it other than being a glorified, like, just projector of an image, right? Versus being able to do all the skills and things with it. Or if you're using slides or using it to the best of your ability or whatever, like being able to execute, not just limited to technology, but even just how to listen and hear all the different interactions and be able to take the different things that kids are giving you, position them in a way that, hey, let's talk about this one first. And that leads into thinking about this person. Now I'm going to ask this person a question because that leads into this thing, and all to get to the point of they are all saying everything that I wanted to say as a teacher. And I didn't even have to say a word, just like Klay Thompson doesn't have to take all those dribbles because he let the team do everything. Like, there's so much skill that's involved with that. And so having those skills means going, and you need that. You need that in order to do the job well. And so I like skill and having those fundamentals down. Mm-hmm. And also too, I had a class, it was the hardest math class I've ever taken. And the guy said, if you understand the definitions, you'll get a C. And I'm like, whoa, I'll just memorize the definitions. I'll get a C and I'll be fine. Right. But then he was tricked us because he's like, if you memorize the definitions, all this other stuff that you think is super, super hard becomes really easy. Cause now you know what a field is, you know what a ring is, and I'm talking abstract algebra stuff, but you know what all that stuff is. And so that makes this question that would be like way out in left field for anyone else that's reading it, that becomes just plain English to you. And all of a sudden now this problem becomes a lot easier because you understand the fundamentals, the skills, right? So there we go. Skill.
And again, you are one of the most skilled educators, particularly in math, that I know. So that is a good choice. Um,
Thank you, Shane.
you're welcome.
Is there purity of intention? Do you have integrity with that comment?
I do have it.
Awesome. Thank you.
I've got a tie for the next one. And so I've already talked about condition. So I think I'm going to go with team spirit, which is right next to skill on the pyramid. And here we've got the star of the team is the team, and we supersedes me. And it goes back to, to that competitive greatness where you want to be the best, you want to be that person, but yet you're part of a team. And for me, we've talked about this before, is as a young teacher, it bothered me when my students went to somebody else for help, another teacher in the department for help. Because I have full confidence in how I explain things, and I had full confidence in how I connected with my students. And so it was a personal affront to me when a student went to another teacher for help. And that took some personal reflection and growth inside myself of saying, Shane, there's 200 kids in every class here. There's 800 kids total. The beauty of being in a school, a medium-sized school like that, is that they have other people that they can go to, that they connect differently with, or explain using different, or they just learn it from them. And if my goal as an educator is to get kids to learn to the highest level, then why am I worried if it comes from me or if it comes from somebody else that they're more comfortable with and they're coming there? And that key, that realization, and I'm not proud to say that that's where I was originally at, but that real reflection and realization unlocked a lot of things for me. Because then when I was in team meetings with other teachers going through stuff, now my focus could shift from not just how do I can apply this to my classroom, but how do we apply this then to all of our classrooms? Because those phrases, when Miss Fingerson wins, I win. When she succeeds with a student, I succeed with the student. And just having that sense around us, because it's really easy as an educator, especially in math, where it just feels different than everybody else. And math just gets beat up on a lot of just, wanting, English has it so easy, or this group has it so easy. We are all part of one team then in that school, not just in your department, but in that school, melding and molding these students in different aspects of who they are, while hopefully having some of these fundamental things that we're working through that we share as our culture. And then that spreads to our district and to our community of those building blocks that we're trying to instill in them. And so we think about team from coaching and all the cliches that go there. But I think it's important as being an educator, because if you're not on the same team pulling for the same goal, then we just go into our silo in our classroom and we don't share, we don't collaborate, and we don't help the system as a whole get better.
Yeah. Well, I think too, back to our days when we had our course meetings, and then even thinking about our individual classrooms, where a lot of times we weren't the only adults in the room too, because we were supporting some kids with some needs, and they had some support systems within their, and they became part of the instructional team. And then you see, like, hey, it's not me explaining, it's Brenda Hamill explaining a question to somebody, or it's Marlene Bickford. Yeah. And so, and having all these people being a part of this collaborative effort, where the goal is, like you're saying, to have this relationship with mathematics where there's some understanding about these concepts that we're trying to teach. And we're all a part of that process, versus, some of the people that when they first started coming to our classrooms, they were like, I'm kind of nervous about being in this classroom, but having the poise, right, to being able to be a part of the instructional team and be a part, someone that people feel comfortable going to, and hey, that's a win for everyone. So yeah, part of that team spirit there. Definitely. All right. So we got some kind of unique lists here, Shane. I'll see how they fit together. Yeah. So for you had competitive greatness, poise, and team spirit. And so I'll give you a second to think about how those fit together. I had some thoughts about mine. So industriousness, enthusiasm, and skill, because I think those are nice bookends, the industriousness and skill for the enthusiasm, because sometimes the enthusiastic person, the you-rah-rah sort of person, that might be like the facade, right? That there's not the the work ethic or the skill behind it. Like, that's just like, hey, we just have this kind of front, and then there's not a lot of, solid stuff behind it. And that, having the industriousness and skill, I think that makes up a nice little trifecta there, to make sure that, we have that, but we're also, like, I guess too, like you being on the farm, there's probably the enthusiastic worker on the farm probably makes working on the farm a lot easier to do too, I would assume. Right? As long as we're safe, right? We can have as long as we're safe.
Yeah.
But to be that one that, hey, I just remember, like, lifting weights or doing other things, or doing hard projects in school, or else, even our team meetings where we're all kind of crunching away at trying to develop the course. And hey, if we can have a little fun while we're doing it as well, and enthusiasm around it, that makes everything a little bit better. So that kind of hard work with the enthusiasm mixed together, I kind of like. How about you with competitive greatness, poise, and team spirit?
Yeah, I would take it. So poise talks about being yourself.
Yep.
Talks about that aspect for you, of you being who you are. Don't be thrown off by the good or the bad. So we've got that poise aspect that covers who you are. And then we've got that team aspect. So that being yourself, then how does that fit within that team spirit? Each person is different. Each person brings their own strengths and weaknesses. And so when we put those together then on a team, whether it be on a course level team, the 2 or 3, or depending on the size of the school that teaches, be in a department, what may it be, of that poise that you bring, then you present that and you use that to the advantage of the team spirit. And then that folds into me with the competitive greatness that what you bring, being yourself, then to the team, that folds into that goal of bringing the best that we can every day for our students, and striving to get them there. And different than a game, right? When we coach, we make those parallels, and Wooden, even though he was a basketball coach, he truly was a life coach. Yeah. He was that coach that stayed in contact with and they stayed, the stories about as he was preparing to pass on, of the players that just streamed back and had to make that contact with him, is evidence that they weren't there just for that. They might have started there as 17, 18-year-old kids, but he brought them to a different place. And so that competitive greatness of how do we bring our kids to a better place, not just in math, not just as the teachers and educators, but as people. We can only do that as a team built up of these individuals with poise.
Yeah, that was good. I like my team. I like your team. I think we did a pretty good job. And again, all building towards, this idea, this definition of success, which is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction, knowing you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. Do you have any ways that you've used this pyramid in your teaching, or even thinking about it a little bit in an application in either your teaching of students or even your role as an administrator and kind of teaching of teachers as well, or maybe even other administrators?
Yeah, I think there's a couple that I would highlight, different than ones we talked about, is alertness, constantly being aware and observing, and always seek to improve yourself and the team. And I like that as an administrator, right? I'm in classrooms and out, observing, doing that naturally as part of the position. But as an educator in general, of just always seeking to learn and to grow from others as to how to get better, how to steal a practice or understand how to explain something better and differently. And alert, it doesn't feel like always the right word for that, but the concepts behind it of just being not being satisfied, of trying to get better. And then cooperation. And I love what he said. This is one of the foundational blocks. I love what he says: have utmost concern for what's right rather than who's right. And this goes back to a story I've used numerous times as I've worked with educators of how we work together. that we had such different styles, we had such different ways of going in the classroom. So we are divergent in so many different ways. And that frustrated me sometimes. But that part of we both had that utmost concern for what's right. We were both trying to reach the same goal, and we weren't. I mean, we'd like to be the one that's right, and we tried to convince each other that our way was right.
That's right.
But we could have that deep and enduring friendship as well as collaborative relationship in our classrooms, 2 doors down from each other, because we had that focus on what's right. And if you did something that worked for you and that I could fit within my style, that was true to myself, all those things, then I would incorporate that in my way. And similarly to you, you could see something from Slow and Steady Shane that, yep, this might be something that I should incorporate into my enthusiastic jump forward Joel. And that's what I believe brought us both forward in a period of tremendous growth, which I'd like to say for both of us, that helped us both get to the different positions we're in today.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think, I mean, even too, and I wanted to throw this in there too, even as a parent as well, some of these building blocks as well, because we've had conversations, not only conversations about teaching in the classroom, but also teaching around the dining table as well, or the dinner table. So even thinking about like ideas of initiative or friendship. I mean, even just I like initiative, cultivate the ability to make decisions and think alone. Do not be afraid from failure, but learn from it. Like seeing my kids and wanting them to try it, see what happens, right? And then let's learn from the experience, not having to make perfect decisions every single time or perfect moves every single time, but to lose the game, to, not do as well on the papers, but then to process and say, all right, well, what didn't I do as well as I could have? How could I get better? Having that initiative and seeing that in some of the things, my kids are doing now, and like knowing like you've done a good job of, because you're a little bit ahead of me in that area, being a good model of that as well. And thinking about, also too, like friendship as well. So there's some good learning, building blocks that we can touch on as well.
I just want to jump in on that part that you just talked about, right? Is giving opportunities to fail or succeed. Just as a coach, I'd rather lose a 2-1 game than win 10-0. Speaking from a softball or baseball perspective, because your kids are going to grow from that competitiveness that happens in a 2-1 game that they're not going to grow in a 10-0 game. And so we want to put our kids, we want to put our students in a position of success or failure. They might be close there, but to make it too easy doesn't do anybody any good on that part. Yeah,
for our math folks out there, that's like the idea of productive struggle, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's a good thing. Yep. All right, we did. So any other things on the pyramid? I got one more question for you, but anything else on the pyramid?
No, I would just encourage people, even if reading the book isn't right, of just having that pyramid of success, just looking at it every now and again. This has been great for me just to review and preparing for this. Again, it's been a couple of years since I've looked at this, and this has sparked conversations in myself. It's challenged me to ask. You asked about what are your favorite. What are the ones, Shane, that you think you're weakest in right now, and feel like you need to work on? And so it's just a good. In John Wood's words, they're just classic. So I just encourage people to take a look at that every now and again.
Yeah, well, and also too, I did a episode where we talked about like a year of discipleship and doing some things with our kids to kind of move them from, childhood to adulthood. And I did that with my pastor down here, Eric George, and we talked about some books we went through. I did not use this book when I went through it with Noah, but I am going to do it when I work through with Jack coming up in the next couple of years. Because it's like, hey, when I'm talking about team spirit, this is what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about using initiative, this is what I'm talking about. So we have like a common vocabulary that we can go back to. So maybe I can get Noah to help facilitate that. And these are great ideas. I'm writing these down. Jumping forward, Joel. That's what I'm doing on the spot. Okay, Shane. I presented you this question. I don't know if I presented this question before, but you are an experienced educator, both in the classroom and through your leadership. Given all that, what is the best thing you have learned, and it could be learned recently, to help you be a better teacher of students or teacher of teachers or teacher of your kids?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with my foundational one that I've had since 2003, and then the one that I've added to that more recently. And it's an old one. We don't know who it's attributed to, but that idea of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, and that just continues to reveal itself to me as an administrator working with families, working with staff members. They don't care about how many years I've been in this position or how many years I've been a teacher. And similarly, as a parent, if you want to bring in that aspect of it, my kids don't care about that. What I know about this or that subject is, if I demonstrate that I care, then they will listen, and then we can work together on that knowing part. That just is a foundation. And then the next part that I think feeds into that I've really been focusing on recently is listen more than you speak. Even as a teacher, we want to fix right away. We want to jump in. We want to solve kids' problems. Are we facilitating learning best by doing that? Listen, hear what the kid is truly asking, hear what the kid truly needs, meet them there. But don't just assume and jump in and be preparing your answer. I know. Listen and listen deeply.
Yeah. What is the actual concern underneath, or what is or even just being heard, right? Just listening. They don't need you to solve it. Just hear them. Those are gems. Thank you, Shane. We finally got to do this.
Yeah. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for your leadership in both in the college and in doing podcasts like this. This has been extremely valuable in my life, and I trust in your listeners as well. So thank you for jumping forward and doing these type of things.
Well, thank you very much. And we'll figure out another one, another book, another something to do. All right.
That sounds good.
Thanks, Shane.
All right. So, you end the podcast episode and you realize that, when you're talking about, these words and you're talking about like success and poise and skills, and then you talk about a word of integrity, which is like purity of intentions. And you realize, wow, this podcast episode is a violation of some of that. So one of them is, hey, I said we're going to do a snake draft. And I completely ignored that. As soon as we were done with the episode, Shane's like, hey, we didn't snake. You know that, right? You just kept going first. Yeah. Sorry. Yep. Sorry. I just was excited we were doing a draft. I was excited for that, and I forgot to do the snake. And Shane is too polite to correct me while we were recording. So, but that's, again, hey, being able to identify that you did not use integrity, that's probably some integrity, right? So anyway, we're trying. Now I'd like to dive into the mailbag. And we have a submission for the mailbag from Stephanie. And if you're looking to submit something to mailbag, you can send questions, comments, and suggestions to joel@hammondownplanet.com. So here is the submission for Stephanie. The question: how do you teach those with a high aptitude in how to teach others? Great question. Now, when I think about this question, I think actually about my experience teaching secondary math methods. Okay? So you think about it. Secondary math methods is people that want to become middle school and high school teachers in a specific content area. That means usually that they have a high aptitude in that content. Speaking from my own experience, when I was at the University of Wisconsin, I was a secondary ed math major. I basically almost had to be a major in mathematics. I mean, the level of math that I had to go to in order to get my degree in secondary ed math, I mean, I was doing modern algebra, doing discrete mathematics, doing a lot of statistics and probability, like all sorts of college geometry, advanced calculus, all this sort of stuff. Modern algebra, where you're talking about ring and field theory, which looked a lot like what like Goodwill Hunting was doing on like the chalkboard and stuff. Those at MIT might disagree with what I just said because it was undergraduate mathematics. I get it, but still, it was in the same neighborhood. Whatever. Anyway, high aptitude. Right? High aptitude in content. And then going back and teaching maybe 6th grade math or 7th grade math or any high school math. And I taught a lot of 9th grade math. And so that was actually one of the major ahas that I had when I started teaching with Joe Dye was I wasn't teaching myself, right? I wasn't teaching a bunch of folks that were successful in math from the kindergarten on, which I was. I think I was pretty successful in that. I had a high aptitude in math, and now I'm being asked to teach those that don't have the same relationship, right? That don't have the same relationship, or even have a desire to have the same relationship. So how do you do that? So one, thinking about that and thinking about answering Stephanie's question, and I kind of see it, this could be a teaching question, but it also could be a tutoring question, right? And so thinking about it. And so one thing that I would suggest is framing it as a relationship. So framing this thing of, trying to learn some sort of content, learn algebra or learn about literature, learn some science, whatever. It's about developing a relationship with that content. So you want them to have a positive relationship with it. So that could be, there's a couple of different ways of doing that, is thinking about, well, where do they see this content within their world, right? So, literature, if they're into some music, you can point out that music, the lyrics of the music that they like is literature, right? Or whatever they're reading, right? And thinking about the specific kind of literature it is. Or if I'm thinking about mathematics, where do they see this mathematics in their life? When will they use this? But I taught in a math that had a lot of different contexts, so I'm ready for that. So thinking about context and, hey, you're already doing some of this stuff, which here, side story real quick, had a student that was student teaching in a school and saw a kid get kicked out of her classroom. And, there was some deficit language around that kid that was being kicked out, like he's not really good at math. And the kid really didn't see themselves as being successful in math. Well, then I saw that kid later in a game shop, and I was doing for my doctoral work, I had to do an ethnography, like a little ethnography where I went and learned something that was completely outside of my own experience. So I went to a game shop and learned about Magic the Gathering. And that same kid was there in that shop, and he was telling me all about this deck that he had built. So in Magic the Gathering, you build like a card deck that you would then use to play the game. You have certain limitations on what can and can't be in the deck. And he said, hey, this is supposed to be like some sort of, what did he say? Junk deck? Yeah, it was some sort of junk deck, but he had figured it out on how you could really play this and win a lot, but people wouldn't see it because they think it's a junk deck. And he talked about, what he was laying out was all these probabilities and logic and all this stuff. I'm like, he's doing math. And here it is doing math here, but in this other context, he's seen as not a doer of math. So making that bridge, right? So there's one way, is to help them see their relationship with mathematics, and also to frame it, the learning, as developing the relationship with mathematics, right? And honoring that. And also knowing that there might be some repair that needs to be done because some harm, trauma, whatever could have happened within the context of learning that subject. So if we think about it as developing a relationship, you mean like, hey, have you had any bad experiences with this subject before? Like, do we need to go back and remedy some of those things? And that might actually be content stuff, right? Where there's definitions and things that they might not be aware of or whatever. And that actually goes right into my second thing, would be to start with definitions, making sure you're speaking the same language, right? And so, thinking about what are the definitions of that you're dealing with whatever content you're dealing with. Are we speaking the same language? That's really important, because if you start talking about either parts of speech or vocabulary terms that people are unaware of, you are speaking a different language. What are you talking about parallel or perpendicular? What are you talking about adverbs and adjectives? I don't know what that means. And so making sure that, again, you're speaking the same language. So start with vocabulary. And I remember in one of my high-level math classes, the teacher said, hey, if you know the vocabulary, you're going to get a C in this class. And I believe I might have shared this before in the podcast, but by having the vocabulary, I was able then to have a much better chance of answering the questions about fields and rings and all this very complex stuff, because I knew the language, I knew the vocabulary, I knew what I could lean on that. Just hey, kind of like this episode, we're leaning on the vocabulary that Wooden's laying out. Hey, when we're talking about integrity, we mean purity of intention, right? When we're talking about success, we're talking about his definition of success. And so, all right, so vocabulary. 3 is representation. So another way to help somebody with a high aptitude teach others is mess around with representation. And so what I mean by that, and from a math perspective, is a lot of times we just deal with symbols, right? And so there's like expanding and like factoring and like solving an equation and stuff like that. And so we're really good. I mean, if you have a good relationship with math or you did a lot with mathematics, you're probably pretty good at manipulating symbols. Well, manipulating symbols is really abstract. That's an abstract representation of a problem. So if you think about a problem like, 5x plus 2 equals 12, right? And so we're trying to solve that. And some of you already figured it out. Oh, it's 2. The answer's 2. You figured that out. Well, great. But some of you, some might be like, I don't know what the answer is. Well, some of you are thinking, well, you have to undo the equation. It's pretty simple. You got to subtract 2 from both sides and divide both sides by 5, and you'll come up with the answer. Versus, let's think about what that actually means in a graph. What does that look like in a graph? So that would mean I'm looking at a graph of 5x plus 2, and I put it on an xy coordinate, and I'm trying to figure out when is that graph going to cross when the y symbol, or at the y level where it equals 12. You have to figure that out. And so that could be like an intersection. I'm going to graph 12. I'm going to graph 5x plus 2. I'm looking for that intersection point. Great. Okay, so there's a visual. And some of you are like, well, that seems like a lot of work. Well, some people, they need that. What are we actually doing? Well, we're finding that intersection point. We're finding when this graph is going to cross 12. Another representation could be a table. And thinking about, if I put in values in for x, when does it push out that 5x plus 2 equals 12, right? So when do I see that? And not when x equals 1, not when x equals 1.5, and x equals 2. Ooh, there it is. Okay, there it is. And so able to see that. That's another representation. A little bit, still, not completely concrete, right? But still a different representation. Another one could be like to come up with a context for this. So, maybe it's, what's a good context? Maybe it's delivering pizzas, okay? For every pizza I deliver, I get $2 for the trip and then $5 for every pizza that I deliver. That's probably not a great situation, or maybe that's not a great situation maybe that's a great situation for you, the pizza deliverer, but not for the business, but let's just go with it. So if I get $2 every time I go out and $5 for every pizza I deliver on that trip, how much am I going to make if I'm selling 5 pizzas? How much did I make if I made $12 on the trip? How many pizzas did I deliver? And that could be a way to figure it out. Like, okay, 1 pizza would be 5 plus 2. 2 pizzas would be 10 plus 2. Oh, 12. There you go. Right? So there's I could actually think about that situation. I could actually model that out. I could use, checkers and say, okay, here's 1 pizza you delivered. All right, so there's $5 for that pizza, $2 for the trip. Ooh, that's only $7. All right, let's put another one on. Oh, there's my 12, right? So having a context too. So representations could be, we've got the symbols, and that's usually the most abstract, right? So thinking about graphing, thinking about equations, or thinking about graphing, thinking about tables, and then also thinking about a context. Well then, hey, Joel, that works great for math, but what about what about if it's I'm trying to identify evidence from a passage that something is true? Well, what's the representations we could deal with there? Usually we say it as a written text. Well, what about if we mess around with an audible, like an audio book, where the book is still there, so we still have the verbal passage, the written out passage, but then we have to throw an audio text on top of it, or we read it out loud. And then it's not the struggle possibly of reading it or getting distracted from the syllables, but just taking in the story and then taking in the passage and then figuring out, all right, so where's the evidence here for this thing that I'm trying to look for? So that's a difference of representation, right? Because if the emphasis is on, finding evidence within a passage, does it need to be the written passage? Yes, you want them to be able to eventually get from the written passage, just like, yes, I want my students eventually to use the symbols, but having that context and being able to do it, and then translate it to a different representation, that's probably easier than just trying to keep doing it unsuccessfully in one representation. So mess around with representation. That's another one. And I think all this too is going to help you deal with empathy, right? Is to change up representations, to change up vocabulary, or to make sure that we are all on the vocabulary, and then also think about is developing a relationship. I think those are great places to start with regards to helping somebody with a high aptitude teach others, right? And so there you go. That's something I say. And also, too, what this is going to do for that person with a high aptitude, it's going to help them come up with a bunch of different angles on how to teach. And that's also going to help them with their understanding and help them develop as a teacher. I know for me, having that empathy muscle got a lot of exercise in my early years of teaching. Because, again, I wasn't teaching myself. So I had to think, like, how would somebody else take up this question? How would somebody else take up this? And having kind of, and we actually had an awesome assignment when I was undergraduate where you kind of had these 3 students that you would keep in mind. And sometimes they'd have identified needs, or sometimes they're just, different personalities and perspectives. And think about, how would I best teach these kids, these 3 kids? Like, what would I do? How would this problem or this exercise or this, question work for each of these 3 kids, and having that as like a perspective on how best to teach them. So that was good. That was a good exercise for me. So yeah, that's my suggestions there, Stephanie, is think about it as developing a relationship and also considering a relationship, and maybe is there need of any healing in the relationship of that student that you're teaching or interacting with. Also then thinking about vocabulary. Do we all start in the same place of vocabulary? And then think about representation. And how do we shake that up so that we're not just dealing with abstract forms, right? Okay, so, and that's also, there's some research behind that. It was specifically in mathematics, if you're thinking about just dealing with abstract, like specifically thinking about it with, in mathematics, like that abstract, like thinking about what's the representation of it? So a drawing or a picture of it, and then what's the concrete? There's a lot of research saying, hey, that's going to help kids be successful, is to concrete, representational, abstract. Lots there. Anyway, I'm talking too much. All right, that's the mailbag. So again, if you're looking to contribute to the mailbag, you can submit a question, comment, or suggestion to joel@amazonplanet.com. All right, that's it for this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Show notes can be found at amazonplanet.com/episode 83. Now, for those of you looking for ways to support the podcast, you can submit a question, comment, or suggestion to the mailbag by sending an email to joel@amazonplanet.com. You can also subscribe, rate, and review, and share this episode which will allow more people looking for similar content to find it. As always, you can follow the Amazon Planet on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or like the Amazon Planet Facebook page. In addition, you can subscribe to the Amazon Planet download, which contains teaching resources and updates from Amazon Planet. You can find links to that at join the email list buttons at amazonplanet.com. And finally, thank you for spending time on Amazon Planet. Thanks to Shane for sharing his time and expertise. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there learning to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.